So we've talked about a couple different topics today, and for those of you that haven't subscribed to our WHCC YouTube, you're definitely going to want to do that. There's a lot of great information on there. We have wonderful people who are willing to give their time and energy to share with the photography industry. And on our recording today, Sean, you talked about brand versus commodity. You talked about a potential looming recession, and as photographers, we shouldn't just freak out before we really find out.
Yeah.
There's a direct Ted Lasso quote there. Yeah. So will you take a few minutes and just kind of recap some of what you talk about in your full program? And I know that program goes a couple hours, but let's just stick with the commodity side of it. How do you avoid that?
Yeah. Now you're asking me to remember what we talked about. So yeah, and one of the biggest things is avoiding what we call commoditization, which if you're listening, you're like, what the heck is that? Mm-hmm. Basically blending in with everybody else, having no reason why your clients should pick you over anybody else purely outside of price and speed. Yep. That's kind of what commoditization is. If you think about gas prices, you probably don't pick your gas based on if it's Chevron or Shell or whatever. It's
nope.
Cool. Is it $3.50 or is it $3.75? We're going with the $3.50. Or if clients need something quick, they're gonna just choose whoever can turn it around the quickest. And so what happens is, especially in these times of like recession, brand becomes really freaking important, because you see that without a brand, you are subject to the commoditization of photography. You have images that you take, and if that is purely what you're relying on, well, you have a million other photographers that do the exact same thing right around you. And so it becomes a matter of, if you want to actually survive, if you want to grow your business and actually make a living with photography, you have to become a brand. You have to figure out what makes you different? How are you standing out in your clients? And that's something that I think you're going to have to figure out, especially as you're listening to this, and in the next 6, 12, 18 months, whatever kind of this timeline looks like for what is in the works, because it is in the works. It's kind of a matter of how quickly it's going to happen or isn't, how severe it is or isn't going to get.
Yep.
And becoming a brand is quite possibly the number one thing you could do, is figuring out what is it that you're going to do that's different. How is it that you're going to serve your clients and fit their needs, and ultimately how you're taking care of the problems and becoming the solution to them and making them pick you over somebody else.
Yeah, definitely. As you were talking there, I'm processing a lot of things and figuring out where I'm going to go next. And I'm going to take a little bit of a right turn here, and I'm going to get a little bit more in the weeds, or a little bit more personal, because you and I have known each other for a long time. We've talked to countless photographers, and, as we were discussing last night at dinner, there's definitely buckets that business owners fall into. And one of the things you said to me last night is, some people, they just want you to do it for them. Mm-hmm. We're not in that age right now. Like, people need you have to be invested enough to put the work in. So how? If you're tentative, if you're overwhelmed, like, how do you put one foot in front of the other to do what you just said, to elevate your brand, to be on social media, to photograph, to sell, to grow? Like, all these things can get very overwhelming, and it's easy to just sit in the corner and be like, I'll just wait this out. Yeah. Which you can't.
No. So this is something, it actually came up during the Academy launch quite a bit. So one of the things, the course I open doors up to, literally one time a year, we do a huge training series. It's like 3 days of training. We do live coaching calls. And one of the questions that came up from somebody was, we know that we want to do it. And it was basically the question of how. We're super overwhelmed. And the only reason that I think that I have seen success is because I'm willing to just try. And it doesn't matter if you don't know how to do it. It doesn't matter if you're overwhelmed. You just have to do it. And if there's a magic answer to how do you do that, I think it becomes an internal question. It's like, well, how much do you really want to do this? And with anybody, we make time for what we value. We
100%.
put in work where we want things to happen. So, if you're a mom listening or a parent, or you have a relationship, if you want to raise a kid, if you want to be a good partner, good spouse, you have to put in the work. You have to make the time for it. If that's something you value every single day, it's not something that you can operate from conditionally. It's not showing up and saying, well, I'll put in the work. If you can just assure me that it's going to work, then I'll do it, right? How many times have you said that to yourself? You're like, well, if I knew it was going to work, then I'll absolutely do it. But there's some level of uncertainty, right? And
belief.
Right? And so in order to move past that, the only way to do it is just to actually start doing. Where I think a lot of photographers, what they do is they live in, we'll call them the buckets, which, we see a lot of buckets, which one of them, probably the largest as creatives that we fall into, is this perfectionism bucket. And how often have you heard photographers say, and you may be listening thinking, oh, I'm doing this. I'm doing this myself. And you sit there and you say, well, I'm not going to do this until it's perfect, or I'm going to keep tweaking it. And just by tweaking it and keeping working on it, well, it's going to be perfect when I do it. But what happens is you lose out on all of that progress, versus how much better off would you and your business be if you just got to what we call the MVP, the minimum viable product. What is it that you can do as a bare minimum that, doesn't look like complete garbage? But
I wondered which word you were going to use.
Well, I paused for a second because we're not going to get your podcast banned on podcast, Apple Podcasts or whatever, and we'll avoid Lucas having to edit out the beeps and the bleeps and all that stuff. And it becomes a point of, if you can just put out what is the bare minimum, if you can just go out and learn from your mistakes or learn from what doesn't work. And I kind of think of it as this way. It's not necessarily a mistake. You have two paths that each action leads to, two outcomes. The first outcome is that it works and you say, awesome, let's do it again. And the second is it doesn't work and you say, perfect, what can I learn from this? So it's less about failing. And I think that that's where this overwhelm comes from a lot of the time. It's this fear of failure. It's this fear of, what if it doesn't work out? What if people say that it doesn't? And truly the only way to grow is to just try it. And if you say, well, I don't know how, or I don't know, exactly what the steps are, I don't know how I want it to look. Well, you have to just try something.
Right.
And there are enough resources out there. There are enough educational courses. There are enough YouTube videos. There are enough Facebook groups that will tell you one thing that you can try. It doesn't matter if it's the right thing, you will learn. And if it is the right thing, awesome. But you just have to start. Right. And it becomes an internal question of like, how bad do you actually want it?
Yeah. A direct conversation I'm thinking about with Sarah Jane Shorthose. I don't know if you know her or not. No. She's from Missouri. She said, she's like, learn now, perfect later. It should be simple, but it's not. And I'm guilty of that. Like, I want it to be perfect. And thinking about it from the White House perspective, we'll launch a new software platform, and it doesn't have every single bell and whistle that it's going to 12 months from now, but it's a way to put that in the market, to learn from that, to figure out what people really are and are not using and what they would like to have, and then we continue to improve on that. And I think sometimes people, look at a studio versus like us here and, think it's so wildly different, but it's really not. It's just bigger with more people. The processes are the same. We just do them a lot of times.
Yeah.
And in a lot of different ways,
The quote I come back to is 70% perfect is perfect. And one of the things I remember, and I think that every photographer goes through this as they begin to grow their business, there becomes a point where you either are going to let something go or you're going to let your business consume you. And for me, that was part of the editing process, where I simply didn't have time to do it anymore. If I did, I literally would have driven myself crazy.
Yeah.
It would have impacted me on a personal level. And what we do is we oftentimes let our business get put in front of our personal lives.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. And so one of the things we say is well, we're going to build this business and we're going to build it. For me, I wanted the flexibility and freedom. For people who don't know me, I started out, I thought I was going to be a cardiologist. I thought I was going to go to medical school. Thought I had my path all mapped out for me. And I quickly realized that yours truly doesn't do so well when people tell him what to do and how to do it. And I realized that I probably won't be so great in a corporate environment, or being told that there are paperworks and things that you need to file even as a doctor, and saying, well, couldn't this be more streamlined? And one of the things that I wanted was that freedom and flexibility. And what happens is I see photographers hold on to things, where they hold on to sending their clients emails where they say, well, if I do it myself, then I'm taking care of my clients more, or I'm going to edit the photos because they're hiring me. And so what happens is we see this almost like creative perfectionism take over, where everything that they want to do it themselves, and they want to do it in the way that they know best. And so what happened is, this was an internal struggle I had when I was outsourcing my editing at first. And one of the things was, I said, well, it's not exactly how I would edit it. It's not quote unquote perfect. It's not how I would put it out there. And I remember that when I first began to outsource, it was a huge leap of faith, where I didn't know what my client was going to say. It wasn't necessarily that I didn't think it would work. It was, what is my client going to say about it? I know the photo is going to get edited. It's going to be okay, but will the client be satisfied?
Right.
And so I remember editing one photo. It's actually hanging up in my studio. It's one of my samples up on the wall. And it's one of my favorite photos. And I remember sitting down with my client, doing her image premiere and ordering session, and thinking, she's just going to love this photo that I just spent, like way too long photoshopping the, dirt out of the felt hat and all this stuff. And getting the light absolutely perfect, and the editing, the retouching is flawless and all that stuff. She was like, oh yeah, that's really good. And she immediately goes, she's like, oh, but I really love this one. And of course it's the photo that's like, there's still like a tan line on her arm from her playing soccer. And so the photo wasn't perfect. The edit wasn't perfect, but our clients don't care about that. Mm-hmm. And often what happens is we sit back, and this goes for everything in our business, where what we see is this perfectionism almost holds us back, where rather than focus on what is important for us, like being able to actually have time and freedom to do what you want, we hold ourselves back by almost kind of like these archaic processes that we've done time and time again, rather than just saying, we're going to let go.
Right. 70%
perfect is perfect. And as long as it is up to your standards and it's not going to look like absolute garbage when you deliver it to your client, or when you put it out into the world, you're going to be okay. And so I see a lot of photographers hold themselves back because they're unwilling to give up stuff and let go. They're unwilling to put processes in place that are going to allow their business to grow. They're scared to hire help because they're like, well, then we're going to have to train them. And it's like, okay, sure, you'll train them, a week or two to do this one thing. And then all of a sudden that frees up how much time for you?
Right.
But we're scared to take those steps. We're scared to let other people go. And I think it's, it's inherent to being a creative, right? It's, no artist wants to be told that somebody else gets to do part of their artistic process. But it comes down to a question. We kind of alluded to this. I forget if it was, I don't know, we've done so many live recordings today, I forget. It kind of comes down to like, are you going to be an artist or are you going to be a business owner?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the genuine question.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter which path you choose. You just have to be very clear on, are you running a business, or are you an artist?
Right. You know, and it's interesting when you said that today. That's how I opened my program when I was speaking out in Idaho.
Oh.
Like, first of all, like, raise your hand. Who runs a business? Who's a hobby? And there's not a wrong answer. Just tell me, because I'm going to speak to the business owners, because that's what we're going to do here. You know, and you do the same thing. You know, you said that earlier. Like, it's fine. There's no wrong answer, but you have to know what you have. And if it's what you have is not what you want, then you have to make a change. You know,
Totally.
And some of those are going to be major changes, and some of them are going to be smaller changes.
Yeah.
You know,
and one of the big things, it kind of comes down to, it's like, what do you want out of it? And I mean, I coach a lot of photographers, and some have huge aspirations. Some are like, you know what, Sean, if I can bring in like an extra $10,000 a year just to pay for family vacations, just to, you know, go see my kid who's at college, pay for a few plane tickets, like, that's a successful business to me. And so I think it's clear on what it is that you want. Just because somebody's running $1 million studio doesn't mean that that's success. Just because somebody's running a $10,000 studio doesn't mean that that's not successful.
Right. Everybody has their own success.
Yeah, everybody. And it comes down to getting clear on what it is that you want. Mm-hmm. What is it that you want out of your business? What is it that your dreams are? And we then map it to that. It doesn't need to look like somebody else's business, right? It doesn't need to mirror what somebody else is telling you to do. It needs to mirror what you want your business to look like. And it's just, it comes down to knowing what you want. And if you don't want to run a business, then that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You can do this as a hobby. You can love what you do as a hobby. It doesn't mean you need to run a business, but if you are running a business, you need to make sure that you're thinking about it that way. You almost need to kind of, you wear two hats. You wear one as the artist when you're out in the field shooting, and you put on a different hat when it's time to run the business.
It's so interesting too, you know, as I'm listening to you, I think that people, I'm not going to say I know that people use money as the default. Mm-hmm. So if you were going to ask, you know, 100 photographers, you'd probably have 90 of them say, well, I want to make more money. But I think that there's more to it than that. There is, like, you have a clear destination for, you wanted to have free time. You know, you wanted to be able to travel. You know, you wanted to be able to do these things to make your life more enriched. And that comes from your freedom, you know, and not having to be at a desk job 9 to 5, you know, and money may be the vehicle to get there.
Exactly.
But at the core of it, or at the root, you know, think about what that really is. You know, is it vacations? Is it college, you know, for kids? Is it that you want to have multiple locations and grow and be a $5 million entity? Like, what is that? You know, and start at the end and work backwards. See how that feels.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think one of the things that happens is photographers, when you say that, they're like, well, I want to make more money. They don't actually want to make more money. They want what more money will give them. And they see the money as the solution. Mm-hmm. But what happens is this often compounds itself into creating a business that actually doesn't give you what you want. And there are so many photographers that I talk to, especially at kind of the higher level, where they're starting to see some signs of success, where they're like, you know, we'd love to grow to, like, you know, double our revenue or you know, whatever it may be. And then maybe they're already doing upwards of 6 figures. And they go, but we want to do like this and this and this. And usually it's like, well, we'd love to, like, spend more time with our kids. Mm-hmm. We'd love to actually, like, be able to take a freaking vacation for once. We haven't taken a vacation, me and my husband, for 5 years because we've been so busy running this business. And so what they do is they say, well, we want to see more success. And they think, well, when I have more money, it'll be easier. But all that happens is you suck yourself into this tornado of just pulling yourself down even further down this, I don't know, it's kind of like this quicksand trap. Like, the harder you struggle, the deeper you get into it.
Right.
And rather than just take a step back and say, what is it that I actually want in my business? What is it that I want from my business? And while people say, well, we want to make more money because money is the tool that allows you to do a lot of those things. We have to look at it from a perspective of more money is not the answer. It's not always what's going to lead you to success. And if you think that more money is going to fix your problems, you're in for a rude awakening.
What's that saying? More money, more problems.
More money, more problems. Yeah. I mean, we see this all the time. You poll people and you say, what's your ideal amount of money? And they say 100K. And then you poll everybody who's making 100K and they say, what would make your life more worth it? And they say, well, making 200K. So you ask people that make 200K and they say 400. You ask the people that make 400 and they say $1 million. And you ask the millionaire and they say 5. And then you ask the 5 millionaire and they say 10. Yeah. And so what you see is that there are clearly lack of clarity on what it is that truly matters. And people see more money as the solution when, I bet if you were to ask somebody with 100 who wants 100K, if you gave them 5 million, they say, oh yeah, that solves all our problems. But when you put them into that situation, now all of a sudden you have the same core problems because now you haven't prioritized what's important. You've lost sight of that. You put your sight and your focus on your money.
Right.
And so I think that's something that a lot of photographers struggle with is they say, well, if we just made more money, that'd solve our issues, right? But are you clear on what it is that you truly want out of life? Right. Is more money really what you want? And my answer is no.
Right.
It may give you what you want. It may make it easier, but it's not what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very in-depth thought process of really figuring out what you really want, and what is going to fulfill you at the end of the day. And, on the business side of things, when you say, I want to, double my business or I want to grow it here, if you don't have your ducks in a row, your processes in place, your outsourcing, your staff, whatever that may be, to double that income means double your work.
Yeah.
Almost, or close to it, because the magic bullet is not just raising prices and boom.
Yeah.
100%.
It'd be nice if it was.
Wouldn't that be great? And it may be okay for a few months, but then it's not, and you have to be careful about that. It is. I think that was a very spot on description. You get sucked into a tornado, and you're fighting to get out of it. And when that train's rolling, it's hard to get it stopped.
Yeah.
And you have to make plans and you have to think about, the long term and, retirement and what does that look like?
Yeah. Are you going to be shooting until you're 75, 80?
Right.
You rolling your walker up to your photo sessions? And it's just
right.
kind of, that's just the fact of the matter. Yep. Like, what is your exit plan?
Yeah.
And one of the, discussions that I've had with photography friends is, they're like, oh, you're like, you don't have any employees? And it goes, I have no desire to do that. I am very clear on what it is that I want out of my business. And I'm very clear on what my business has given me. Absolutely, I outsource. Absolutely, I have help. No business has ever been created by one person alone, right? You think, back in the day, Steve Jobs or Tim Cook is literally manually building the iPhones? Probably not.
Probably not.
But one of the things that we look at, we say, well, if I could just have this amazing big studio and all these employees, and you have to ask yourself, you have to get clear on, okay, well, what is that going to look like? Now, all of a sudden, especially during COVID, a lot of individuals that ran studios, their biggest fear is, holy cow, I've got 5 employees now that I need to figure out how to make payroll. And we've got no clients coming in the door. It becomes a different level of business that you run. And so you have to get very clear. It's like, what do you want out of it? What is it that you want? And so again, there's no right or wrong. It's purely what works for you. But at the same time, you also have to really understand what is it that you're signing up for. Bigger stuff doesn't always mean, that it's going to be better. Bigger isn't always better.
Yes, that's a good quote right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, what you're talking about with the studio and the employees and stuff. I mean, none of us thought that 2020 was going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't know a single person was like, oh yeah, I could see this coming, and was prepared for it. But there's people who made the most of it, and they took that time that we all say we don't ever have, and when there wasn't anybody coming in, and they prepared, and they put the work in then, and also took time for their families, and they're the ones that are on a good path right now, and that takes a lot of maturity to not be like, I'm just gonna take a month off here. That'd sure be nice. I'm not even gonna think about anything until the world's gonna turn back on. Oh, great, now we got to catch up.
Yeah.
And that's a sinking feeling to have. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you, Sean. The lighter that you can run the business, as in like overhead expense as staff,
the
full time,
yeah,
all the things, if you're able to outsource and, the virtual assistants and the things like that we can truly make use of now, that makes a photography studio a very viable business to be very successful, because you can run it a little bit lighter. We're in a different age now where the expectation is not a brick and mortar studio anymore.
No.
It's very, very, very acceptable to work out of your house or to just completely work on location.
Yeah.
Totally fine. Where 20 years ago, it would have been like, well, this person probably isn't viable or isn't serious because they don't have X. That doesn't exist anymore.
No.
You
And one of the things, I think, like, photography is one of the best industries you could possibly get into if you're looking to do that, because you can run it so lean. It's, like you mentioned, I built a 6-figure business basically from like the trunk of my car. Like, I'd carry studio samples into a Starbucks or to my clients' homes. And simply because I didn't have a studio didn't mean I couldn't make it happen.
Right.
So just because you want a studio, sometimes you have to say, okay, is that the best move for my business? And eventually, I now I have a studio space. I call it, is basically my sales room, because I have no desire to really do studio photos. And and I just, to be frank, got tired of hauling my samples out of my trunk. But it wasn't something that was like, this is going to make me more professional, or this is going to make me more money. It was simply, let's just do something that's going to be a little bit easier. Now, has that potentially brought more business as a result, or allowed me to have higher sales? Well, maybe. I'm able to show wall art better. I'm able to show products a little bit more easier. I can expand my product offering lines and all that stuff. But it wasn't like, I have to do this to be successful. There are ways to be successful without, jumping all the way to the top.
Yeah. And just putting the work in too. You're willing to put in the work. If you're traveling with, a trunk full of samples and you're carrying them in and out and you're doing those things, that's hard work. And cutting your teeth on, that time of your business and building up to where you're at, and to do those things in the right order. You mentioned 20 minutes ago that, I'm willing to try this, but I want to know that it's going to work at the end.
Yeah, the conditional commitment.
Right. That's a good description. But think about how conditional commitment a brick and mortar studio is. Yes, I'm going to agree to pay a $5,000 a month lease and a $100,000 build up and sign for the next 7 years, and just pray that there's not a pandemic, that there isn't a recession, that I don't have a personal emergency, that I can make those things happen. Because when you get drugged down by that pulls creativity away. It makes all this so stressful that it's not enjoyable anymore.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee on that.
No. And it kind of comes from almost like this, like, I think it's Pavlov's hierarchy. Some psychologist who studies basically like behavior. I think it's Pavlov. So if you're listening to this podcast, you can look it up. But it's basically this. It's a pyramid, and basically at the base of the pyramid is like human necessities, and that's like food, it's shelter, it's having like warmth, right?
Yeah.
And as you build up, what happens is you move up into what we call like these like enlightenment levels. And so you have like these, think of it as like layers of a pyramid, and like the next step up, it might be like maybe your purpose is like having family, or maybe it's, you know, building a good career. And then at the very top, it might be like individual spirituality or something, you know, individual enlightenment is what we'll call it. And so there are like these levels to the pyramid. And what happens is you can't really move up until you have those we'll call them primal needs met. And so what happens is when we operate, where you mentioned like, you know, taking on a huge lease, taking on all the, you know, either debt in a business or these risks in a business. Now what happens is it inherently drags you down that pyramid, whether you want it to or not, where now all of a sudden you're trying to meet these basal needs where you absolutely need to have them met. And what happens is it doesn't allow you to kind of reach those higher levels as a person. And so what happens is these people that say, well, I'm just going to do, you know, I'm just going to reach for the top right from the get-go, rather than doing it in a way that say, hey, let's start from the bottom. Let's just like get all this stuff met, explore our creativity a little bit as we kind of have those needs met. And then what we can do is we can make the logical steps to grow our business.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I think about it. And part of it too, you mentioned like, you know, sharpening your teeth. It's there's another, I love psychology. I mean, that's what drives consumer behavior. There's one, it's called they basically call it like the thought experiment machine. And basically they're philosophers, and they say, okay, you have this machine. And let's say that machine, for you as the photographer, you want to create a studio. It can be as many clients as you want, as much revenue as you want, you know, whatever it is. And all you have to do is you go through this machine, and it's going to create that for you. It's going to give you all the desires that you want. Or the other alternative is you actually go out and do it, and you follow that journey, you follow the path. You actually have to go out and do. And everybody who says that they went through that machine was not as satisfied as had they gone through the journey. And so what I say is, as you're on this journey, enjoy it.
Right.
Take your time. Actually savor it, because these steps that you're going through to get to where you want to be are going to be so much more rewarding than if you just simply took the easy button from Staples back when you remember those commercials.
I do.
and just raced your way to the top. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with going the long route.
No.
I think that there's much more reward, and there's more satisfaction of looking back. It's, you know, it's the same as if you climbed Everest versus had a helicopter drop you off at the top. Which are you going to feel more satisfied about? You got it to the top. You can say that you summited Everest, but one, you took a helicopter to the top. The other, you actually made your way to the top the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it, Sean. And immediately that Adam Sandler movie popped into my head where he finds the
click,
remote.
Yeah.
The click, yeah. That's so true. And so we had guests here a few weeks ago, KDI Photography from Flagstaff, Arizona, and they're wonderful people. And they had created a video, and we had shared it. And we played it during their YouTube live. And I didn't pick up on this until they were here, and they explained the reason that they did this in the video the way they did. And there's images that are coming up during the video, and it starts with maternity, and then newborn, and then, you know, first birthday and family, and then, you know, working up. And it finishes with an elderly couple, you know, grandma, grandpa, you know, probably in their 80s. But the thing that I didn't notice until she pointed it out was that during that video, those images come faster and 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 faster. And she's like, that represents life, you know, because to begin with, you know, everything's slowed down. You know, your summers are long. You're on your bike. You're playing. You want to grow up. You want to do these things, and when you get there, it speeds up. You know, and it's crazy. It really does. But to think about, you know, enjoying that journey and relishing in those successes, learning from the failures. It's important. It's part of it.
Yeah.
It's how we learn as human beings.
Yeah. And I think that, that like really almost like savoring those lows too, like being present in those lows makes those highs so much sweeter. So, I ski quite a bit. And so we took a guy's trip down to Mount Bachelor in Bend, Oregon. And we had one of our buddies flew out from Pennsylvania, and he's like, I finally get to ski on an actual mountain, right? He's used to like these little hills out there.
Yep.
And so we show up and we're so excited. I'm looking at the forecast and I go, boys, we're going to be in for a frickin' time tomorrow. We're talking whiteout conditions. We're talking, took us an hour and a half to take a 30-minute drive because of snow and ice on the road and everybody driving 10 miles an hour. We get up on the mountain and it's just wind. Like I got off the chairlift and almost got blown over. Like we're talking like 40, 50 mile per hour gusts. Quite possibly the worst conditions I have ever skied in. We're talking like literally icicles forming on your face as you're going down the mountain. Like
sounds like Minnesota.
Literally 3 feet of powder. You can't even like stay above the powder because you can't see to go fast enough. And so all of a sudden we get back, we go, that was like one of the worst days of skiing I've ever experienced. The next day we had the most beautiful conditions. Bluebird skies. It was the perfect snow. Literally could not have asked for better conditions. They opened up one of the lifts that opens up like 10 times a year. Just happened to be on that day. How much better was that second day after you'd gone through the crap of the first day?
Right.
And I think that summarizes how a lot of people need to experience life, which is, yeah, you're going to go through the lows. They're not, you can't make them go away.
No, they're coming.
But those highs are going to be so much sweeter when you actually have experienced those lows.
Yeah.
And you learn from them, you grow from them. And it just makes that, I mean, that's what life's all about, right? Is dealing with both and figuring it out along the way.
Yep. You know, and to bring this conversation full circle of my original question for you of how do you put one foot in front of the other and how do you get started and not be overwhelmed? It's experiencing both sides of that.
Yeah.
And knowing what that high feels like after the bad day, you know, and keeping on with that and keeping sight of what's important and understanding and respecting the low.
Yeah. Respect the low. Yeah.
Respect it.
Yeah.
You know? So, well, this has been awesome, Sean. That I think that was about an hour.
Wow.
I'll get home tonight after dinner and Kelly will want to talk and I'll be like, yeah, there's no more words today. The words are done. Awesome. Well, we appreciate you being here and sharing and hanging out.
Thank you for
fantastic.
having us.
Yep.
It's been fun.
And I believe that it's darn near time for tacos and beer.
Let's do this.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean.